Hello, everyone. We are back with another episode of Living Covenant, and I'm here today with Zoe. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Zanita. I appreciate that.
It looks like you're recording in a classroom and have probably just finished a day at work. Tell us what you teach. Do you enjoy being a teacher?
I do enjoy being a teacher, and yes, this is my classroom, or at least the part of it that you can see. I haven't showed you the messy part. I teach a variety of things, but predominantly I'm an English and history teacher. So, depending on the day, there could be a mix of things, but I major in ancient history and have the privilege of taking a range of students from year 7 to 12 out here in Maitland, which is amazing.
So good. Yeah, I feel like we just heard a little scream, which is fun.
Probably. There's going to be a lot of screams in the background this one.
School's kicked off. We're ready to go. You teach high school. Have you ever been envious of the primary school's ability to make the room a theme park or an aquarium or anything like that?
Look, never. To be honest, my older sister is a primary teacher, and I did help her put up many a classroom display. But, I'm not really jealous, put it that way. I don't know. I find something about teenagers just suits me so much better. And you can probably see a couple of things. Like, I do like putting things up. So I feel like we do almost get a second attempt at primary here.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. I have a lot of respect for teachers. I think it was at the bottom of my careers list. So hats off to what you guys do. But aside from teaching, tell us a little bit about who you are and what your life looks like.
Well, to be honest, most teachers will probably say that teaching can take over much of your life and does take a lot of your time. However, outside of teaching, I love just being out in the community, doing dancing and community involvement. I love my church. Shout out to Hillview and Morisset. You guys are amazing. And I love being involved in all the events that you all put on, and quite an active member of our church team, which is such a privilege.
Love it. Good to hear. Well, you wrote for our Living Covenant book, which is out and is looking colourful and bright and beautiful. I think you're smack in the middle, which to get the centerfold story is a pretty cool thing. But you wrote on Gideon, who I feel like is a little bit of a niche individual in the Bible. Like when I stopped to think of Gideon and what I knew about him before reading your piece, I was like, I don't know anything about this guy. This is someone who's just kind of slipped past my mind. So why did you choose to write about Gideon? What stood out to his story to you?
Look, I think that for many people, Gideon is a really niche character, which is strange because there are multiple chapters about him in the Old Testament. For me, I have always been someone who, has felt and still feels like I get so much more out of the Old Testament than I ever get out of the New Testament. For me, and I think it's the ancient history teacher in me, I've always loved looking at books like Judges, like First Samuel, like Kings, Chronicles, all of those history type books, which don't get talked about a lot, I think, because they're not very lovey-dovey. And there's not always a lot of good things going on in these books. In fact, they're quite challenging. And Judges, where we find Gideon, is one of the most challenging books for a lot of Adventists to wrap their heads around, because stories like Gideon, where, there's mass slaughter and these kind of crazy circumstances that the Israelites find themselves in, they're hard for us to reckon with. But personally, from having taught and studied ancient history, for me, those kinds of challenging situations are what I deal with every day in the historical record with my students.
I know it's the classroom, I was going to say.
Yeah. We have a lot of conversations about some really tricky areas of history and difficult stories. And I find that they're actually the best discussions because kids ask really great questions about morality and justice, and so many things that are at the heart of Gideon's story is actually this awesome tale of justice, which I love.
Yeah, so often when you read these kind of intense stories, whether it's in the Old Testament or not, or just in real life, those hard questions are often, most people have them, but they're often so hard to answer, and they're often hard to find good answers to. But if you don't answer them and if you don't grapple with them, then you just kind of convince yourself that God is who he says he is, or is who everyone else he says. And there's like this unsettledness, I suppose. So I think it's awesome that you're having those conversations with your kids.
Yeah.
But, you said that you really love the Old Testament and you really love
Mm,
these ancient
I
stories.
do.
Um, when you approach the Old Testament, do you approach it like you do with any other historical kind of moment? How do you come to understand them more? Because I think a lot of people just read them and they don't have that cultural context. They just read it and get confused and head to the New Testament from there or whatever. But what's your process of unpacking a story or journeying through a story?
Look, I think for me, the historical context makes everything come alive in the Old Testament. When you know what's going on and why everything is happening the way it is, we tend to get less bogged down in the weird customs and things where people go, why are they exchanging shoes? Why are they, throwing dirt on themselves? Why are they doing all these strange things that we just look at and go, oh, that's weird, moving on, going somewhere else? Everyone jokes about skipping Leviticus and Numbers for a reason, because it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. I think for me, the cultural context is such an important thing in this text, especially with Gideon, because it really helps us to understand what is going on and how to find the meaning within the story.
Yeah, can we unpack maybe in a nutshell what is Gideon's story, and can you give us some of that context that we might miss along the way?
I think the most important thing for people to understand when looking at Gideon is that the promised land is the promised land for a reason. It is prime real estate. If you've ever seen a map of the areas around Israel, and we're talking like a geographic map that has the different landforms and kind of shows the green and the non-green areas, you'll see that the promised land is the only green section for miles. It is the most fertile land. It's right between key rivers. It is the best place you could ever hope to build a society. And that's why when the Israelites show up, there are so many people already living there. There are countless tribes they call them the tribes of Canaan, that are living there because it's the best place to be. And it's why it is such a challenge for the Israelites to conquer the land in the book of Joshua. There's a reason why the spies came back to the people and said, look, the grapes are huge, this is a great land. However, there's people that are like an ant colony, they call it, who was just swarming this place. And unfortunately, when we pick up the story of Gideon, we're in a space where Israel has failed to drive out all of their neighbors. And that has resulted in these people trying to take back the promised land, try to carve out little bits on either side of the tribal territories, because really around it, it's not really a great place to be. There are places you can live, but not many. And so we have these raiding bands like the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Assyrians, all these big baddies that come up in the Bible are the neighbors who are surrounding the promised land, trying to carve these bits off. And when we pick up Gideon, Israel has sinned once again, no surprises there. And because of that sin, God has allowed the enemy tribes to come in and attempt to retake some of that land. I entitled my piece, The Man in the Winepress, because when you pick up Gideon, that's where he is. We first hear that Gideon is literally hiding in this stone wine press because he's so afraid that these raiding bands of people, and I will have to fact check, but I believe it's the Midianites. The Midianites are coming in, and it says like swarms of locusts. They are waiting until harvest time, coming in, taking everything, and then just moving off again. So they're nomadic people. They're moving off to another place and leaving Israel with next to nothing. And Gideon is in the wine press because he's trying to hoard like this little bit of grain and hold on to it so that people don't steal it from him.
Right. So Gideon's not in the wine press afraid for his life. He's more just like holding on to a small amount.
So yeah, it says that he's trying to like separate the grain from the stalks in the wine press. So he knows that they're coming to take his food, and he doesn't have much down there. Wine presses are not like big places, but he's crouched in there trying to kind of save what he can from these raiding bands, which you can imagine there's lots of other people probably doing it, but we know Gideon definitely is.
Maybe not on the scale of that.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so wild. So he's hiding in a wine press trying to save what he can. Where does the story go from here? I know that these Old Testament individuals all have something in common where God asks them to do something. But before that, what happens?
Yeah. So everyone's preparing for the latest kind of raiding party. They always raid in kind of the harvest time of year. So around summer, autumn, spring, you'll expect these people to show up. And Gideon and the people are afraid. They're really afraid. I called the section header the perfect recipe for humble pie because he's in the lowest of the low. He's literally hiding out in this place, hoarding things from the enemy. But it's in this really low space that it says that, and I will read it in particular, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah belonging to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." God sends an angel to actually come and speak to Gideon in the winepress. And actually bring him news about this task that God has for him, which is to drive out these Midianites. God is taking mercy on the people and saying, enough's enough. We're going to stop this, and you're the guy to do it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, this idea of like every year this kind of happens, because
Yeah.
I was talking to someone recently and they were saying their parents are actually missionaries in Israel, and they were having a conversation with one of the locals and they said, oh, every year around, I actually don't remember which month, but they said every year around November, let's say, war kind of breaks out on some level kind of thing. And it just happens the same month. Don't know why, but they just said we kind of brace ourselves. It's kind of become normal. So I imagine that the Israelites are kind of in the same situation where they're just like, summer is coming again. Like, brace yourself, hold on to whatever you can, because it's inevitably going to happen. Like, there's a pattern.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Gideon's in this wine press. How does he respond to God's request?
Not well. So I've preached on Gideon before, and we had the conversation in my church about the fact that a lot of us grow up being like, don't question God. Don't step up and question his will, because it's his will and he's the Almighty God. But Gideon, he just goes ahead and questions anyway. The angel has just delivered this incredible message. You're a mighty warrior. You are going to save Israel from this situation. And he goes, really? He fully questions. And I don't know if I have the exact wording, but in any case, he says, Lord, if you want me to do this, then why have you let all of this happen? Why have you let me be in this situation and brought such misery on the people if this was your plan all along? And he really starts questioning this angel multiple times. He's not willing to just accept the message. And for many people, we think, oh, what a dangerous move. What are you doing? But what I love about the story is that the angel and, at large, God is like, all right, you have questions? Let's talk them through. So the angel never says, how dare you question the Lord God Almighty? Instead, he lets Gideon vent, let it all out, and then just responds in a very mature way to Gideon's immaturity, really.
I love how understanding God and angels have been through so many of the stories in the Old Testament, because I think there's been a few where it's like they are just so gentle and patient and understanding of our lack of trust sometimes. That doesn't surprise God that we struggle to trust him. If anything, he gets why we struggle to trust and why we struggle to believe. And so I think it's such a good reminder, because I feel like sometimes we can also have questions and we can doubt, but that can sometimes make us feel ashamed that we have doubts and that we struggle with those things. But Yeah, God is so
He
understanding.
is. And he's even more understanding than just kind of listening to Gideon and then giving a response. He actually goes above and beyond here to actually prove that, yes, this is really what I want you to do. And yes, I really will bring victory through you. And he does that when Gideon is like, okay, I can understand now why has this happened? But if you are serious about me going and leading this army when the odds are very much against us, then you need to give me a sign.
Mm.
And Gideon asked for a sign not once, but twice. After he gets the first sign, he's like, oh, cool. I got the sign, but I'm still a bit nervous. Could you please reverse the sign? So I think one time it is, I'm going to put a fleece on the ground. If it's dry and the ground is wet, then I know that you are going to deliver the Midianites into my hand. Whereas this time it's, if the fleece is wet but the ground is dry, then I will know that you are going to give me the Midianites into my hand. So he's like, the first time could have been a fluke. I'm going to ask a second time. Make sure it really is what you want me to do. And God's patient. He's so patient. And he complies with every one of Gideon's requests until Gideon is satisfied that, yep, this is what God wants me to do.
That's awesome. I want to get back to this whole sign thing because I know that you've had your own experience with this. But let's go into like the Israelites go to battle, essentially.
Yeah, they do. They do go to battle. And it's a really strange battle account because you think if you're a commander planning to go to battle, you bring everyone and everything. You are decked out, especially because these people are like half starved. They haven't gone to war in a while. These are untrained people just doing what they can in support of Gideon. And so really, even though they've got stories of how God can bring these crazy victories, there had to have been some doubt. And interestingly, we have this strange situation where they're traveling to go and do this battle. And God says to Gideon, well, you got too many people. Which Gideon's like, what? Like, what do you mean I have too many people? The Midianites, he says, are like locusts. They're uncountable. There's so many of them. What do you mean I have too many people? And God says, yeah, you got too many people. If you win with this many people, the glory will not go to me for working the miracle. It'll go to you for being this epic commander. And that's not at all what's going to happen. So this is what we're going to do. You are going to take them to get some water like you would. And the people who drink a certain way, you're going to ask them to stay behind, which is really unique. And then after that, his force is like halved. And with the people who are left, God says, you still have too many people. You need to get rid of some more. And so Gideon pretty much has to halve his force again. And then with the measly leftovers is coming upon this huge encampment of Midian, and he's like, I don't know what we're going to do. What strategy do you do with this few people? And God comes through again and tells him the strategy that he wants him to use. And God causes chaos in the camp so that Gideon and his men prevail ultimately.
So amazing. Do you know how many people they would have been up against?
Look, it doesn't give us a number, but it says literally uncountable amounts of people. And when you think, this is a strong nation, they're nomadic, they can move quickly, they have tactics to fight quickly, they have camels, they have weapons. Even if there aren't that many of them, they certainly have better equipment and tactics than Israel has. But what they don't have is God.
Yeah. Totally. And they've been nourished on the best of all the grapes in the land.
Oh, yeah. They've been nourished on the promised land.
Yeah. I actually, funny side note, I was prepping for your episode and the episode on Joshua at the same time. And I recorded the Joshua episode first. And as I was talking to the guest, I started talking about how God asked them to reduce their numbers in the Joshua story. Anyway, so if anyone listens to the Joshua episode and hears me note that God asked for the number to be reduced down to 300, That is not true, in case anyone's, making notes in their Bible and what does 300 here and 300 there mean? But yeah, that is Gideon's story. But yeah, so amazing that was kind of the case, because it's true. I think, if they had have taken over and then they had have won, easy to kind of be like, oh yeah, well maybe it was just us. Maybe we are just a stronger, better kind of nation. I feel like that's so natural for us. Like, we ask for a sign from God, we see it come, and then we just automatically start doubting if that was actually God.
I've got the exact wording now that I've turned to it. It's in Judges chapter 7, and God is saying, you have too many men. I can't deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. So they're saying the whole purpose is this is an exercise on reliance on God, not reliance on Gideon. And we know that in Judges, when things tend to go wrong for the judges, as they do a lot, it's because people put faith in the judges, not in God, who enabled them and gave them the strength and the signs and everything to do this. And so God is like, this is not an exercise in you are an amazing man, Gideon. Because if you had forgotten, I did find you literally in the lowest point of your life, and I lifted you out to be this incredible commander who's remembered even today. But you certainly didn't start that way. And it's through my strength that you were able to do these things, not your own.
Yeah, well, Gideon was also called a mighty man of valor.
Mm-hmm.
When did he get that reputation? Did he get that beforehand? Because I think even if having that reputation would have made him more likely to be prone to take.
Well, interestingly, God calls him that when he first sends the angel. So the angel comes to him in the winepress and says, you are a mighty man of, like a mighty warrior or mighty man of valor, depending on what version you've got. And then Gideon starts his whole questioning, wait, what? Really? So he's not showing those traits at all. So we don't know whether maybe he was a warrior before this. We don't know. But we do know that God calls him that.
So it's like God speaking authority into Gideon, like speaking strength into Gideon, maybe.
Yeah, saying, you will be this, even if you aren't already and aren't feeling it in this humble moment, but you will be known as a mighty man of valor.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned at the start of this episode that this is a story of justice. Can you unpack that idea a bit more?
Yeah, I think really I love the Old Testament because it does deal with justice most of the time. And it deals with, people being in horrible situations like the Israelites are now, like half-starved, people are taking everything that they've worked for, everything that they've built. It would have felt like the end. It would have felt like because of their sins, they'd been abandoned. And we know that many times in the Old Testament, the Israelites felt this way. They were in Egypt for almost 400 years before they were taken out of Egypt. They have these really long periods of suffering, but God always comes through at the right time. He raises up Moses and Joseph and Joshua and Caleb and so many people and Gideon and many others to end the suffering at the right time and to repay those who caused the suffering with essentially a taste of their own medicine. And I love that God, there's a particular verse in the Old Testament that says, revenge is mine, saith the Lord. It's not your job to deliver yourselves because I will deliver you. You just need to have faith that I will at the right time.
It's such a good reminder. Hey, it's so easy to, I must get revenge.
Yeah. And also I need to be delivered from this situation right now as it's happening. But we know hindsight is 2020. It's when you look back on your life that you see how God has wrought that justice and has brought about good things in his timing, even if it didn't really feel like it in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about your own personal experiences, because this is, I guess, part of the series that we tried to really hone in on was, it's awesome to look at these individuals, but in our modern 21st century culture, how do we relate to Gideon? How does his story come to us? So can you share a bit about your experiences with praying to God and getting answers?
Yeah. Look, I find there's a lot that we can relate from Gideon, and there's multiple chapters of Gideon. You can take bits you relate from pretty much anywhere. But where I have found that I relate to Gideon the most is in him questioning and doubting and asking for signs. That, particularly the asking for signs, it's risky business. And even just the lesson this morning for this quarter talked about the Pharisees asking for signs and how Jesus responded to them quite harshly and said, even with signs, you wouldn't believe. And even I'm not going to give you signs. You need to have faith. And, I was brought up on that in church. It's dangerous to just randomly pick a Bible verse and say that's God speaking to you. It's dangerous to question God, to ask for signs. But Gideon asks multiple times, and God is really good about it. He's very patient, very understanding, and he answers the doubts that Gideon has and shows that he's not upset for us to genuinely bring our heart to him and ask questions. And I think for me, where that came in, and it seems like a non-starter now, working full-time for a couple of years, but when I was leaving school, I felt like I was really lucky because I was one of those people who knew what they wanted to do. And I'd known that I wanted to be a museum curator for years. I'd done all the right subjects to prepare for it. I did my work experience at the National Museum in Canberra, which is like our premier museum. And I loved every minute of it. It was spectacular. And I thought, I've done it. This is it. I'm happy. But those of you who listened to the first few minutes will know that I'm not a museum curator. I'm actually a teacher. And it came about towards the end of year 12 that, people ask the question, what are you going to do when you leave school? Everyone's curious, especially at church. And I would very confidently say, I'm going to be a museum curator. I've got it all planned. This is what I'm going to do. And almost everyone would be like, oh, like, that's nice. Like, go you. But, I always thought that you'd make a good teacher. And it was to the point where people would say that so often. And I used to complain to my parents after church because that's where it happened most. I used to be like, oh my gosh, people keep saying, oh, you'd be such a good teacher. I don't want to be a teacher. Teaching's so boring. I was never interested at all. But then as it just kept going over successive months, I kind of started thinking, look, this isn't dying down. Maybe this is God trying to say something. Because in my life, I've found that often when God wants to tell me something, he does it through the people in my life, I've found. Some people get it in other ways, but that's always worked for me. And so I was driving into the church car park and I was alone in the car and I was frustrated. And I remember praying to God. I remember praying, Lord, if this is true and you really want me to be a teacher, then you need to make it so that at church today, somebody asks me, have you considered teaching? And then I will know that this is a sign from you. And I quite literally did not even get out of the car park before someone was like, hey, how are you? Have you considered teaching? And in that moment, I sighed and kind of looked up and went, okay, heard you loud and clear. That's definitely a pretty sure sign. And he opened the way for me. I asked for the sign. I got the sign I wanted pretty much immediately. And, I didn't stop there. I kept asking. I said, if this teaching thing really is it, then you'll give me a place at Avondale University. And sure enough, I got an early entry confirmed on the day of my year 12 last chapel. And I was like, right, okay. And I said, well, if it really is for me, then you will help me to do well on my placements. And I did. I said, if this is really for me, and I kept asking these little things along the way, and God complied every time. Until I settled into it and found that I really loved teaching. I really enjoy it. And the best part is God compromised. So now I get to teach history, even though I don't work in a museum.
Yeah, that's true.
And God will compromise with you on things like that if you are willing to follow his will. And I found that in my life.
That's awesome. I imagine that might also been quite difficult just because this is something that you said that you were so sure of and that you really
Yeah.
had your heart set on. Was that something you had to grieve and process, or was that something that God just took and gave you this love and joy for teaching fairly quickly?
Look, even though I had the signs, I did have to really shift my frame of mind. I had to rethink my year 12 subjects. I had to rethink what life was going to look like in the next couple of years. I rethought which university I was going to go to and many other things. But to be honest, I had a ball at Avondale. I loved it. And I learned so much on all of my placements that by the end of my first year at uni, I was pretty certain that this was the right path for me and that God gave me the skills. I don't know, public speaking makes me so nervous, like unbelievably nervous. But when I get up in front of the classroom, I don't feel anything at all. God just takes that away. Get up in front of church and it's a different matter. But in front of the class, God took all of the nervousness away and he gave me the strength to get through some quite difficult subjects and university and come out still loving it.
Yeah. If he calls you to something, he's going to equip you. And that's a
He
sure.
does. And I love in Gideon, and I made that one of the key quotes in my article, where God says, go in the strength that you have. He doesn't say, go in mighty strength, go in great valor. He says, go in the strength you have. And I'll, if I were to finish the quote, I would have said, and I will do the rest. And God does the rest for Gideon.
I'd be interested to know, I'm assuming you've since asked for signs from God. Maybe not, but I feel like this is a common experience where either people, they are constantly asking for signs and don't really feel like they get any, or maybe they have had a sign answered, but then he doesn't always give clear signs. Like he doesn't, if we were to ask him for one every day, we wouldn't get, signposts and road signs flashing us all the time. What has been your experience like post that asking God for direction? How have you grappled with him not answering at times when you've wanted him to, and maybe silent at times, or what's been that experience?
Look, this was one of the only times that I've ever had a clear answer from God. I've asked God for signs plenty of times and felt like I've gotten radio silence. And I'm sure many other people have also had that experience. And I think that's one of the challenges of faith. There's a beautiful New Testament verse. We have faith in the things we cannot see. Sometimes when you're not getting an answer, you just have to take it on faith and believe that God has something worked out and still trust despite that. And it's not easy, it's tricky. But God never said that the walk would be easy. And I think that whether or not we're getting an answer, God still hears and he knows the desires of our heart. And often I've found when I've looked back, I've seen the little ways in which he did answer, but I didn't really cotton on, was an answer in the moment. And obviously each situation will work its way out in some way, for positive or for not, but God will work amongst it regardless. Because I found with Gideon, he certainly did not expect for his force to be halved twice and to win the way that he did. He was not prepared for that. And I was not kicking and screaming, but I wasn't happy about the answer that God gave me, even though I'm happy now. Plenty of times, even if you do get an answer, it may not be something you ever thought for yourself or something that you really anticipated. But the Ellen White quote that I included in my article, I highlighted here. If you walk in humility of mind before the Lord, then he can work with your efforts and his strength will be made perfect in your weakness. And I love that if you walk humbly before God, he will listen. even if you maybe have to wait a long time for his answer, he will listen and he will help you have the strength to get through it.
Has that been your big takeaway point? You wrote this piece on Gideon a little while ago now.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you spoke on it as well. What's kind of been the thing, the gem that you've remembered or carried with you since then?
Yeah. I think my gem is firstly to not be afraid to ask God. If you are coming with a genuine heart, not just let's see if the sign thing works. If you're genuinely coming before God with an answer that in a question, God hears and he can respond in pretty mighty ways. So I think don't be afraid to ask, firstly, because so often we are. And also, I think for me, the other takeaway is that God says to Gideon, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Ultimately, God has sent all of us to work for him in some capacity, whether it's being training your children to be like him in the home or in a specific occupation. If you're working for God, he is sending us, but not as perfect workers who have everything organized, but as, in the strength we have and trusting humbly that God will fill in the rest.
Yep.
And I think for me, that's the biggest takeaway, that even if what God is sending you to feels insurmountable or feels like it's just not what you'd intended for yourself, God can work it out if you trust him and are willing to step down in humility.
Yeah, it's so good. There's this verse, I've just blanked as to where it is. It's in Psalms somewhere, but it says that God has the best plan for your life. Like he isn't just leading you down some average. He wants the best for you. He wants you to succeed and flourish and all the rest. So if you go to him with your life, then he will guide the way.
Absolutely.
Final question. This book is called Living Covenant. And so a lot of these stories are looking at the promise that God keeps with us. Where do we see that in Gideon's story?
I think we see it in the justice that I mentioned earlier, that, God has made a covenant with his people that he will be their God and they will be his people. And that even when they walk away from him and do the wrong thing, and yes, they may have to be punished for that, and Israel has been many times, God doesn't let that last forever. And he keeps the covenant even when people don't. And in this case, he sent Gideon to solve the problem and bring Israel. And I think after, I don't know the exact verse, but there's a couple of chapters in Gideon's story after the battle that everyone kind of forgets about. But it indicates that while Gideon was judge over Israel after the battle, Israel had a time of prosperity. People, God made the people be able to be peaceably in this land that he brought them. The covenant was upheld despite the efforts of everyone in Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. So good. Well, it has been great having you on the podcast just to flesh out some more things. We loved your piece. It was awesome. For anyone who wants to read the full thing, you can find it on the Record website, or you can find it in the Living Covenant book. If you go to the Adventist Book Centre and type Record, you can get 10% off. So yeah, thank you again, Zoe, for coming on. It has been awesome to chat.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Zanine.